A truck crosses the border at 4 in the morning, and in the space of a few meters the world changes entirely. The road signs change language, the currency changes value, the speed limits change law. The driver who just crossed from one country to another in Europe has not crossed a desert, a mountain, or an ocean. He has crossed an invisible line on a map, and yet everything about his life on the other side will be different. Pensions, courts, taxes, beer. From space, Europe at night looks like a string of small islands of light, each one separate, each one bordered by darkness. There are 44 countries on this continent, packed into an area smaller than the United States, and the question that has occupied the smartest men in Europe for 300 years is simple. Why? Why does a civilization that invented the modern world, that shares a currency and open borders and 500 million people, refuse to become one country? The usual answer is history. 2 world wars, grudges, pride. That answer is wrong. The real answer is geography, and it was written into the ground before the first border existed. Compare Europe to its own creation, the United States. America is one giant country because its geography allowed it. A flat, open plain, rivers that connect, and one dominant language and culture pressed violently westward across it. Nothing could stop the expansion, so the country swallowed the continent. Europe is the opposite. Europe's geography does not press together, it cuts apart. Mountains wall off whole regions. Rivers run parallel and never meet. Peninsulas turn their backs on each other and face the sea. Islands look outward, not inward. And every one of those barriers bred its own people, its own speech, its own kingdom, and eventually its own nation. The borders of Europe were not drawn by politicians. They were drawn by terrain, and no treaty, currency, or parliament can undraw the ground. Start with the rivers, because rivers are the cheapest border on earth. No wall to build, no garrison needed. The water patrols the line by itself. Europe's major rivers almost never connect to each other, and because they do not connect, they act as boundaries, and every boundary river became a sphere of influence with a capital city on its bank. The Danube is the perfect example. It is Europe's second longest river, 1,780 miles, rising in Germany's Black Forest and flowing southeast to the Black Sea. It touches 18 countries and forms the border between Slovakia and Hungary, between Croatia and Serbia, between Serbia and Romania, between Romania and Bulgaria. 2,000 years ago, it was a border of the Roman Empire. Later, it was a border of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Ottoman Empire. And every time an empire shrank, the nations along the river re-emerged from behind it, like land reappearing when the tide goes out. The cities the Danube raised are the proof. Vienna, Bratislava, Budapest, Belgrade. 4 capitals, 4 countries, 1 river, doing the work of 4 walls. The exception to all of this is France, and France is the exception because its rivers connect. The Seine flows west to the Atlantic. The Rhone flows south to the Mediterranean. France's rivers link to each other, so trade and troops and ideas could move across the whole country, and the country responded by becoming the most unified state in Western Europe. France is the only European power that is both northern and southern, Atlantic and Mediterranean, and that unity is geographic, not cultural. Meanwhile, everywhere the rivers refused to connect, the map refused to unify. Each river valley sealed off its own economy, its own city, its own flag, and the borders hardened over centuries until they became nations. And then the nations built institutions on top of the borders, and now the borders have elections and armies and national anthems. That is the first lesson of the European map, and it is the cheapest one. Rivers that meet make countries. Rivers that do not meet make borders. And Europe's rivers, with one French exception, never meet. Above the rivers rise the mountains, and the mountains are the walls that no treaty has ever demolished. The Pyrenees, for example, did something no army in history has fully undone. They sealed the Iberian Peninsula off from the rest of Europe. The tribes of Spain and Portugal, prevented from expanding north into France by the range, spent thousands of years merging among themselves instead, becoming Spain and Portugal, and even then the mountains kept working. Catalonia, cut off behind its own corner of the range, is still loudly asking to leave Spain. The Alps did the same work for Italy, framing it off from the continent. And the Balkans, the most fractured terrain in Europe, produced the most fractured map in Europe, a pile of small states that have never once held together. Not under the Austro-Hungarians, not under Yugoslavia, which was the most famous failed unity experiment on the continent. Mountains are the most permanent political structures in Europe. Empires collapse, currencies die, but a mountain range still stands, still dividing, still quietly deciding where one language ends and another begins. The mountains handed their work to the sea because Europe's second great divider is the peninsula, and peninsulas face the ocean instead of each other. Italy is the clearest case. It has been a single state since 1871, longer than Germany, and it is still split down the middle, industrial north, agricultural south, and political parties openly campaigning for the south to break away. The peninsula's shape made the north look to Europe and the south look to the Mediterranean. Two economies, two cultures, one flag, and the flag is the least important part. Spain suffers the same curse in worse conditions. A high plateau, the Meseta Central, ringed by mountain ranges, narrow coastal plains with poor soil, short rivers that cannot carry trade, and the Pyrenees cutting it off from the wealthy markets of northern Europe. Spain only began catching up after it joined the European Union in 1986, and its geography is still holding it back. And then there is Greece, the most beautiful dead end in Europe. Steep cliffs, almost no fertile valleys, Athens stuck at the tip of a peninsula, nearly cut off from land trade, and scattered around it 1,400 islands, 6,000 if you count the rocks, 200 of them inhabited. It takes a navy just to patrol that territory, and across the Aegean Sea sits Turkey, a larger country Greece has fought wars against, so Greece spends billions it does not have on defense it cannot avoid. The peninsulas of Europe are why the South is poorer, why the South resents the North, and why the continent's own unity project keeps running into a wall of sea-facing geography. The islands finished the job, and the islands are a chapter of their own because Britain is the most important island in the world, and it has never in its entire history fully joined Europe. Its moat, the Channel, protected it from invasion and from integration alike. Britain joined Europe's wars, but not its institutions. No euro, no Schengen open borders, and finally, in Brexit, no membership at all. France and Poland spent decades quietly using Britain inside the European Union as a counterweight to Germany, a seat balancer in an institution the island half belonged to. And when Britain left, the lesson was not political, it was geographic. Islands never fully join continents because islands do not need to. The Channel is as permanent a border as the Pyrenees, it is just wetter. The deepest divider of all is not a wall or a sea, it is language, the human fossil of every wall and sea. Geography bred tribes, tribes bred speech, and speech bred nations, until Europe ended up with hundreds of languages in an area smaller than the United States, which forged exactly one language, by conquest, by pressing one culture violently westward across open plains. Europe could not do that. Every mountain valley and every river basin sealed off its own tongue, and the languages multiplied with the terrain, and every language carried a flag with it. The result is the continent's permanent condition. Europe is the place where unity means negotiating in a language nobody grew up speaking, where the translation budget of the European Union is the map's own confession. Las divisiones de Europa are not in the parlamentas. They are in the ground, in the valleys, in the peninsulas, and in the mouths of people who have been speaking a separation for 1,000 years. And now the center, because every one of those ancient divisions comes together in a single country, and that country is Germany, and Germany is the reason Europe can neither unify nor afford not to try. Germany sits in the middle of the North European plain, the corridor that runs from France all the way to the Ural Mountains in Russia, the easiest invasion route in the history of the continent. Armies have swept across it for 1,000 years, east and west, and the country that sits at its heart is too powerful to ignore and too central to contain. For a century, the entire European strategy has been to cage Germany, to build institutions around it so its economic strength can never again become military strength. France, which knows what Germany can do when unleashed, has spent the decades since 1945 locking Germany inside the European Union and NATO. Poland wants exactly the same thing, and Poland has its own reasons. Its borders have been a flipbook for 1,000 years, appearing vanishing, reshaping as the German and Russian tides flowed across it. When Henry Kissinger famously asked, "If I want to phone Europe, who do I call?" the Poles updated the question, If the Russians threaten, do we call Brussels or Washington? And they know the answer. The cage is the only unity Europe has ever achieved, and everyone inside it knows what it is for. But a cage made of institutions is only as strong as its weakest economy, and in 2008 the geography underneath the whole project came back to the surface. The financial crisis split the European Union exactly along its oldest line, the one between the rich north and the poorer south that the rivers, mountains, and peninsulas had drawn centuries before. The northern countries became the donors, the southern countries became the supplicants. Germans pointed out that they were working until 65 while their taxes paid for Greeks to retire at 55, and they asked why, and the answer, in sickness and in health, was not satisfactory. The Greek side responded that the euro benefited Germany more than anyone else, and that austerity imposed from the north was an assault on sovereignty. The Greek media put a Hitler mustache on a front-page photograph of the German chancellor. The German finance minister lectured Greece on its responsibilities. And for a few months in 2012, the entire Union looked at itself and saw not one civilization but two, the careful, industrious North and the profligate South, exactly the two Europes the terrain had built, wearing modern suits and fighting about retirement age. The stereotypes were ancient, only the currency was new. That is the real story of Europe, and it is the answer to the question the continent has been asking for 300 years. Europe is not 50 countries that failed to unite. It is a mosaic that has held together better than its geography should allow. The mountains, the unconnected rivers, the peninsulas facing the sea, the islands looking outward, the hundreds of languages, all of them are still there, still doing their quiet work of division. And the miracle is not that Europe is divided. The miracle is that the division has stayed peaceful for 70 years, which is the longest stretch in European history, and it has stayed peaceful because somebody, every day, pays for it. The European Union is not a country pretending to be one. It is a cage and a bandage and a miracle of maintenance, a machine for keeping the fences friendly, and like all machines it stops the moment the caretakers stop. From space, Europe at night still looks the way it always did, a patchwork of small lights separated by dark lines. But the dark lines are not empty. They are the rivers that never meet, the ranges no army removed, the peninsulas that turned away, the moats no currency crossed, and the 1,000-year work of geography. The lights are still burning because the continent that never stops being aware of its own divisions is the one that never stops maintaining them. America became one country because its geography made it easy. Europe stays many countries because its geography makes it impossible. And the only unity Europe will ever have is the one it has now, a fragile, expensive, brilliant act of will, standing on a map that was never on its side.